make him an offer he can't refuse.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Stuff that dreams are made of.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
One morning, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas, I don't know.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Go ahead. Make my day.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Hello and welcome to Front Row Classics, a production of the Front Row network of shows, where we take a look at some of the greatest films ever made. And here's your host, Brandon Davis.
Well, hello to everybody out there in podcast land. This is the Front Row Network with NPR Illinois Community Voices. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and I've got another special interview for you all today. This is actually the second time I have talked to this guest. My guest today is George Stevens Jr., who I spoke to back in November. And if you remember correctly, he mentioned in the interview that he was getting ready to release a book coming out this spring, summer, and he sure delivered on that promise. It is a wonderful book. It's called My Place in the Sun, Life in the Golden Age of Hollywood and Washington. And I went out and I got a copy, and I got to tell you, it is everything that you would think it would be and more. George has lived a fascinating life, and he has known practically everybody that you can think of from the Golden Age of Hollywood and the Golden Age of Washington. Just the stories that he tells. And in this interview, because in our last interview, we really outlined most of his life and some major events. So in this interview, I really just asked him his impressions of different people that he met in his life, different events. We focus on some of the special Kennedy Center honors that he was involved in, some of the special AFI Life Achievement Awards he was involved in, being on his father's sets. We talk about his encounters with people like Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean, and certainly John F. Kennedy and Katharine Hepburn, and so many other wonderful personalities of the 20th century. And he is a warm, welcoming guest, and just an honor to get to speak to. And so I just want to jump right into the conversation. Here is my interview with George Stevens Jr. And it is an absolute pleasure to welcome once again to Front Row Classics, Mr. George Stevens Jr. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, Brandon. It's nice to be back with you.
Yes. And it seems like just yesterday, but it was back in November when I last talked to you. Time flies.
It does.
Since then, though, the last time I talked to you, the book was in the works and, getting ready to be released. And since then has been, how have you been enjoying the reaction to the book and all of the praise it seems to be getting?
Well, I must say, it's just wonderful. I mean, the conversations I've been having about the book, are so stimulating. And of course, it's that people seem quite fascinated with it and find so many different aspects that are interesting, of course, is very pleasing to me.
Absolutely. And you mentioned to me here before I went on the air that you're currently in the process of recording the audio book. How's that experience?
It's challenging. I mean, it's a lot of work, and I'm delighted that I'm doing it because, this book is in one large sense, a history book. And in fact, the people I was working with today said, that it's going to be a time capsule and it will be great to hear it in the author's voice.
Yeah, I listen to audiobooks quite a bit, and there's just an extra sense of a personal touch when you get to hear it in the actual author's voice.
Good. Well, it's on its way soon.
Wonderful. Well, I've read the book and I absolutely loved it. And it's a wonderful, account of your life and the life of your family, and a real page turner. And I've listened to some of the other interviews you've done, and I know that you're not a fan of name dropping, but what's wonderful is you don't even really need to name drop because everything in this is authentic.
Oh, that's so nice. Yes. But it's interesting that I realized kind of in writing the book, almost after I'd written it, that my wife Liz and I have the kind of broadest range of friends, partly because of my life in Hollywood. And then doing the Kennedy Center Honors for 37 years, we honored 188 of the most interesting and accomplished people in the world, because it went beyond Americans. And then my association with politics and journalism, we just have this blessing of interesting people we've known. And so that's part of what populates this book.
Absolutely. And it really reads like a true historical account of Hollywood and Washington. And of course, that's part of the subtitle of your book. And do you really feel that I can tell that you feel that you were fortunate enough to have lived through the golden age of both Hollywood and Washington? Is there a common thread, you think, between the two? We tend to put the two of them together in our lexicon, especially in the last couple decades, but are there similarities between Hollywood and Washington from your experience?
There are, yes. There's similarities and differences. Mm-hmm. One of the similarities is that people in public life today, like people in Hollywood, are public figures. Uh-huh. And I think that it creates a kind of comfort between the two cities and two professions.
Absolutely. And just wanting to just want to start, because last interview I talked to you, we kind of did an overview and an outlook on your life, but I just want to delve into some of the stories and some of the figures that you talk about in the book. But I want to go back to just the beginning. I found it interesting, and what I didn't know was you come from a long line of show business people. Yes. And all the way back to your grandparents even. So can you just tell us a little bit about the show business lineage in your family?
Right. I'll raise the ante. Great-grandparents.
Great-grandparents. Yeah.
Yes. My great-grandmother was named Georgia Woodthorpe. She was born after the Civil War in San Francisco. And when she was 6 years old, one of the great Shakespearean actors, the tragedian as they called them, saw her at an actors club or something, and he asked her parents if she could work with their company. And Georgia had a wonderful career on the stage, became a star in the theater, and is unique for being the youngest Ophelia to Edwin Booth, the greatest Hamlet in American history. She played Ophelia to him when she was 17 years old. And then she gave birth to my grandmother, Georgie Cooper, who gave birth to my father. So, and she also really, Georgia Woodthorpe, started 5 generations of Stevenses in show business.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I mean, there really is a love of, and I don't want to necessarily say the business. There was a love of the art from the very beginning in your family. Yes. There was a sense of wanting to show excellence through the arts.
Yes, it's so true. Yes. And I must say that, impulse has really gone down through 5 generations. That it's not to make a buck, but to do something that's going to, uplift and inspire.
Mm-hmm. And you really, especially when you discuss your father in the book, you really paint a wonderful portrait of who he was and what his outlook on filmmaking was, and how he really believed there needed to be one person at the helm and a strong vision, and not necessarily run by committee. And that's something you've carried on through your life as well.
It is, yes. You describe it very well. I mean, from a young age, he realized what was important in filmmaking was control of your work. And today we talk about it, final cut, casting, all of that. And I found it to be a good model.
Absolutely. When you were growing up in Hollywood, it's interesting. You really paint a picture of you really grew up like regular people. It wasn't necessarily a Hollywood lifestyle that you were living, even though you did have famous neighbors. Somewhat, it seemed more like a typical sort of suburban lifestyle.
It really was, and I think it served me well. That I didn't get too caught up in that sort of entertainment world before I was old enough to know good from bad.
Yeah. Did your father bring his work home a whole lot? Did you ever hear him talk about work a whole lot, or did he pretty much leave that at the studio?
Well, when I was young, to a degree, but he went away to war when I was 11. So he brought his movies home.
Sure.
When I was about that age, 10, he had a 16 millimeter projector, and he taught me how to set up the tripod screen and how to thread the projector. And he would get prints of his films. And some of the Wheeler and Woolsey comedies I used to watch, which were really, real gag comedy, great fun. But then Gunga Din came. And as a young person, I used to love watching Gunga Din, The Great Adventure with Cary Grant and Victor McLachlan and Doug Fairbanks Jr. And Sam Jaffe, which is the story of Kipling's poem. And Sam Jaffe plays the regimental beastie, the water boy, but who wants to be a soldier. And Cary Grant kind of encourages him to play the bugle and all. And Gunga Din ends up saving the regiment with his bugle. And I watched that film, and there's a humanity in it with the bagpipes playing and the funeral of Gunga Din, and the British commander says, "You're a better man than I am, Gunga Din." And I learned to love that kind of storytelling.
And I tell you, that's a movie that still works even to this day. It's still exciting, and it's still funny.
And so funny. I mean,
yes.
The subtlety of the humor. Just the grace of the humor. And Cary Grant, is so wonderful, and they play off of one another so well.
Nobody better than Cary Grant. Did your father have a favorite film that he directed, or were they all kind of his children?
They always asked him, and he never quite pinned it down. Certainly in my era, Shane and Place in the Sun, then you say Giant, The Diary of Anne Frank, and then the older pictures. Somebody wrote recently a review of my book, Anne Hornaday, in the Washington Post. And she said the maliciously, I don't know if that was the perfect adjective, but underappreciated, the more the merrier. Some of his comedies were just so great. And Swing Time with Astaire and Rogers. Was there ever a better musical?
There's a picture right there of Swing Time. So that tells you how much I enjoy that movie. But it was interesting when you recount, your father going off to war, and so many of the Hollywood documentaries and things that I read about your father, there's always this there's always this theory where they talk about, how much his work changed after the war. Before the war, everything was lighthearted and funny, and when he came back, everything was much more had much more meat to it and serious. Do you follow that as well?
I think there's some considerable truth to that. Although I loved pointing out in the book that I think it was in 1938, several years before he went to war, he wanted to make Paths of Glory and brought it to Columbia Pictures, but they wouldn't fool with it, the picture that later Stanley Kubrick made, which just indicates that his head was there, that
Sure.
the war and the experience at Dachau obviously deepened his sense of the complexity of the world.
Did he open up much about that, or was that something he sort of held close to himself?
No, he talked about that. We had that footage, that color footage that was shot at Dachau. And he one time got the cans out and ran it, started to run it for a friend. And then he just turned it off and said, we can't look at this. But it was so important that they filmed it, his motion picture unit, because he sensed at that time that they had to get all of the detail of this, because there would be a time when people would say, this never happened.
Absolutely. And just watching those films to this day, it's still, I don't think there's any other, that's documentary filmmaking at its best. Just showing, not dressing it up or anything, just showing the actual raw footage. And it's still to this day sends chills up your spine.
It does.
Absolutely. Moving on, though, of course, you titled the book "My Place in the Sun," and I recently rewatched "A Place in the Sun" for my podcast. And what struck me this time is, well, first of all, how relevant it still is in 2022, and just for such a personal story, how much of it feels like you've been through an epic, even though it's really this wonderfully intimate story about three characters. And he really gave it this wonderful cinematic signature. And you feel like you've, been through this whole saga, and it's really just been this intimate time with these people. And of course, the amazing performances. And I think that it still holds up as, one of his great works.
Yes, it is. And I saw it about 4 weeks ago at Film Forum in New York. I was asked in connection with promoting the book. They were doing a Montgomery Clift 100th anniversary. And to see this film 70, maybe 75 years after its making with an audience, in 2022, and just how totally engaged the audience is. And I don't know if I told you that there's a story that connects to your feeling about this film. That I went with him in 1950 to the Academy Awards. He'd been back from the war for several years, and he had finished making A Place in the Sun based on Theodore Dreiser's novel, An American Tragedy. Joseph L. Mankiewicz came out, the winner of the last Oscar for All About Eve, I believe, in the previous year, to present the awards. And I sat next to my father, and I remember him saying, John Huston, The Asphalt Jungle, William Wyler, Detective Story, Vincent Minnelli, An American in Paris, Elia Kazan, A Streetcar Named Desire, and George Stevens, A Place in the Sun. It was a pretty good year.
That's a great year.
And we were driving home that night, and this was before Cinematex, streaming DVDs. Pictures came and went. And the Oscar was on the seat between us driving home. He was driving the car. I was about 17 or 18. He looked over at me and he said, "We'll have a better idea what kind of a film this is in about 25 years."
Yeah.
He was talking about the test of time, which is really how you measure films. It's not the one that's very trendy in the year it comes out, but the ones that audiences stay with through the years. Now, in 1951, when he said that to me, he did not know that he was talking to the future founder of the American Film Institute. But the test of time was at the very heart, and is at the very heart of the American Film Institute, both in film preservation and in the Life Achievement Award, honoring the great filmmakers who throughout a career, their work has stood the test of time. So it's interesting, I think.
That was a harbinger of what was to come. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I loved reading in the book, of course, A Place in the Sun was the beginning of a lifelong friendship with Elizabeth Taylor. And you tell a wonderful story about having lunch with her in the commissary.
Yes, it was a Saturday. I was a freshman at Occidental College, and I would go to visit my father at the studio to watch him shoot the picture. And I watched him work with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor. I think they were shooting the scene in the pool room, as I recall. And he introduced me to Elizabeth. And then they broke for lunch. And she comes over to me and said, "Would you like to go to lunch?" Well, I think I said yes. And I remember walking down the studio street with her and into the commissary, and in her wake, as it were, had maitre d' at the commissary, showed her to her regular table, showed us to her regular table with the eyes of all the diners on us. And we sat and we had hamburgers and chocolate milkshakes.
Wow. That is quite that's quite a memory to take with you. But were you one to, since you grew up around all of this, were you ever one to get starstruck, or was this just, these were just your father's coworkers?
I had an admiration for them, and they were people you recognized and all, but I never had that kind of starstruck thing. And I was asked about that on Leonard Maltin's daughter on a podcast. Who was the actor that made your back of your neck? And I disappointed her because you asked the question. I never really had that feeling.
Sure.
And then feeling her disappointment, something came to my mind, and I told her I actually did have that feeling. And it was after I'd gone to Washington to work with Edward R. Murrow. I was invited to a dinner party, and after dinner, the door opened and I was standing kind of in a circular area near the doorway, and in on a cold night without an overcoat walked John Fitzgerald Kennedy in black tie. And he walked up to this group, and it was the era of black and white television. Color hadn't come along. And to see John F. Kennedy in color walk into the room with a smile and talk to those people, I was starstruck.
Doesn't get much better than that. I hear, I hear all these stories about Mr. Kennedy and his charisma, and I guess it's all true when you hear people talk about just he had that presence as soon as he walked into a room.
He did, and and as I describe it, kind of brushes his forelock and he had this capacity. He was so interested. I'll extend the story.
Yeah.
That shortly after that, this was a large dinner party, and he'd had a previous engagement, and I had met Newton Minow, who was the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission at age 36, who made the vast wasteland speech to the broadcasters. But in any event, and I was talking again with Newton Minow after dinner, and he asked me, he said, "Oh, have you met the president?" And I said no, and continued what I was saying. And then I looked over, and there was President Kennedy. And, and Newt said, "Mr. President, this is George Stevens. He's come from Hollywood to work with Edward R. Murrow, and the president said, "Oh, I know about George." But he said, "I have something I want to ask you." He said, "CBS made $240 million last year. Why can't they broadcast Jackie's tour of the White House in color?" Which was this thing of President Kennedy, whomever he confronted or engaged with, he'd find something that to ask them. He was interested in other people and what they might bring to the conversation. And that was part of the charisma and I think part of his skill as a politician and his imagination and vision as a leader.
And I really get a sense when I read your book about, the great connection there was between politics and the arts during the Camelot era in Washington. And so just so fascinating to me about how much the arts were appreciated. And I get a sense that really the arts didn't have that kind of hold on Washington until the Kennedy administration.
No, not at all. And particularly film. I mean, film was not included in the first draft of the legislation for the National Endowment for the Arts. But Kennedy got film. I mean, he understood it. And he took a great interest in the documentaries we were making for USIA and would call me on occasion to ask about one of the films. And getting a call from the president not only is pleasing, but when I would tell my colleagues at USIA, most of whom were older than I, that the president had called, was asking about our film or about our work, it uplifted an entire organization. He had that effect. The foreign service officers at USIA were playing over their heads during the Kennedy administration because they really felt that he knew about it and was engaged.
And I know that Mrs. Kennedy, Jackie, had a great influence on the president's appreciation of the arts. And I remember last time you telling me, she probably had a little better taste than he did.
Yes, she was known to have said about her husband, his favorite song is "Hail to the Chief."
Is it true that of course the connection with his presidency being known as Camelot, was he a fan of the musical Camelot?
I've heard that he was, certainly they had seen it.
Sure. And then
I think he liked the music. Yes.
Right. And then also, you mentioning your work with the USIA, and I found it fascinating, when you would travel with Jackie and when she went to Asia, and about all of the planning that went along with that because of the relationship between India and Pakistan, and you had to film different films. I'm sure the logistics of all those travels was a lot to pre-plan.
Well, yes. To be precise, I did not go on the trip, but I planned the movie making for the trip.
Yes.
And we made these two films. As you mentioned, we discovered that, I discovered that there was enmity between India and Pakistan, and was advised to make two films, Invitation to India and Invitation to Pakistan, which we combined for showing around the world, calling it Jacqueline Kennedy's Asian Journey. Yeah.
And when President Kennedy passed away, You mentioned, you really had your hand in 3 different memorials for him, and of course, that was, of course, not a happy time, but it really sort of planted the seeds for what would become the Kennedy Center Honors a decade later.
Did. Yes, I was asked to be an advisor on the John F. Kennedy Library, and after President Kennedy's death, the planned National Cultural Center in Washington was named by the Congress the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and there became an advisory committee for that, and Lyndon Johnson was agreed would appoint 9, and Jackie Kennedy would appoint 9. And I was thrilled to find out I was one of her appointees and had the opportunity to work on the planning of that, which was an inspiring opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about last time the inception of the Kennedy Center Honors and how all that came about. But I loved reading just some of the different stories about what it took to get some of the honorees to accept, and what it took to get some of their tributes taken care of. And just a couple I wanted to cover was, I know it was a challenge getting Katharine Hepburn to finally accept her Kennedy Center Honors. Can you tell us just a little of that story?
I guess, yes. We had an advisory committee, the Artists Committee, and they would recommend honorees. And Katharine Hepburn had not been honored, and it grew every year, the number recommending Katharine Hepburn. And we had spoken to her, and she just said, that's not something I want to do. I'm a very private person. And this went on year after year. And finally, one year, I was watching television, and I saw something called Alexander Cohen's The Night of 100 Stars, #2. And walking across the stage, all in black, was Katharine Hepburn. And I called her the next day, and I said, she was very nice. I knew her. And I said, Miss Hepburn, we have this artist committee, and each year they name you more than anyone else who should receive the honor. And then they come and they say, why not Katharine Hepburn? And I say, she's a very private person, and this is just not something that she would want to do. And I said, now, what am I going to say to these people, having seen you at the Radio City Music Hall? And she kind of, you just don't understand. I am a very private person, and it would just be too difficult for me. And I said, well, we would take very good care of you. And she said, I'm going to get off the phone. You can call me next Wednesday, but don't get your hopes up. So I called her back next Wednesday, and the same conversation. She said, it's just too painful. I rarely go out for dinner. And I said, may I ask you something? I said, we read all the time about this Yankee fiber of yours. I said, and it seemed like my voice was coming from someone else. I said, why don't you just summon some of that Yankee fiber and say yes? And she snarled, all right, yes. And then she came, and she was a beautiful honoree. And I've got the letter she wrote in the book talking about her pleasure with the occasion.
And I watched the honors clip on YouTube, and it's really, you can tell she's really very touched by what's going on. And she's wearing this black coat and Reeboks. You said,
yeah.
And it's exactly what we would expect and want from Katharine Hepburn.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And then you also mentioned I've noticed one of the most watched honors that have been posted like on YouTube has been the Led Zeppelin tribute, and you mentioned the logistics of putting that together, and that went on as you were receiving the honorary Oscar in LA. Right. So that took a lot of careful planning as well.
Yes. I had my son Michael was my devoted partner and very resourceful, and he took charge when I left to go to Hollywood overnight to get the Oscar.
Yes.
And the Led Zeppelin tribute is if you ask about what would be my 5 favorite tributes, Led Zeppelin has to be among them. I think 70 million people have watched it on YouTube.
Really, yes, very so well done, and it's really a joy to watch. And well, before we get to, I also want to just talk about some of the memorable AFI Life Achievement Awards that you talk about in the book. But I wanted to go back to the USIA a little bit. We had talked about just your view of excellence and how important excellence is and how we should honor it. And I found interesting, you talked about the experiences at the at film festivals, international film festivals, and especially places like Cannes, and how at the time we were sending over movies that were somewhat mediocre just because they weren't offensive at all. And you really took it upon yourself and other people as well to make sure that we were sending better quality products.
Yes, we wanted the international viewers, particularly the film communities, to respect the best in American film. And it was embarrassing if we weren't sending our best films. And we put together a committee, Fred Zinnemann, John Hausman, and two others, and really made good selections.
Yeah, and do you think that gave sort of American film a better standing on the world stage?
Yes, it certainly did. Yes. You have to respect the audience, and people at film festivals would not give awards to pictures that were second rate.
And we mentioned last time that especially when you were in the USIA at that time in the 60s, there really was not a respect in terms of film history at the time, or film preservation, and how I think movies were kind of looked at as sort of second-class art. And of course, you were instrumental in helping to raise the conversation about that. And of course, that's what birthed the American Film Institute.
Yeah, and I was in this position at USIA, where I was kind of the film person in the government. I mean, there were others, but I was with Murrow. I was the better known. And so I was always asked about things like that. And when the National Endowment for the Arts provided money for supporting the arts, they weren't sure what to do with film. As one person says, you can't give a grant to Warner Brothers.
Right.
And I was in a situation where, as you suggest, I'd been at film festivals and I knew about the disappearing films. I knew the importance of training new filmmakers. And so I was in a position to propose or suggest an American Film Institute. And then later I was asked to run it.
Yes, and I think I told you last time, but it really was instrumental in my young years. I remember watching the Life Achievement Awards and then the 100 Years specials, and they really helped to really expanded my vocabulary in terms of movies. I remember I would see a movie on one of those lists and I would go rent it and check it out, and it really did. It helped expand my outlook on the world of movies and not just what was constantly in front of me all of the time.
Gosh, that's very nice to hear, Brandon.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
The AFI appreciates your vote of confidence.
Yes. And, we talked about the Life Achievement Awards, and well, first of all, I just want, the one person who I'm sad never did accept it, and I know you tried, was Cary Grant. We had just talked about him, but, unfortunately, it just seems like he was not into making public speeches.
Exactly. And when we started the Kennedy Center Honors, not solely for that reason, but I felt that we didn't want to ask these great artists to come and sing for their supper, as they're so often asked to do. So we made this part of it that you're not asked to speak or perform. And that made it easy for Cary Grant to accept our invitation and be a Kennedy Center honoree. Yeah.
Yes. When we talked about Gunga Din, yes, what a perfect film actor. and just so great. Well, he's a lifetime achievement recipient in my mind still, even though
me too. Yes.
Of course, though, the first person you honored, and I think rightly so, was John Ford. And it's interesting when I look at clips once again on YouTube, and just to see the array of people who were there, and and President Nixon, and how bipartisan everything was at the time. What are your memories of that first evening and that tribute to John Ford?
Yeah, yes, well, yeah, it was bipartisan, but it was also during the time of the enemies list.
Yes,
and Gregory Peck was the founding chairman of AFI. So when Nixon arrived, he came directly in black tie to the Beverly Hilton ballroom, or where there was a private area for a quote VIP reception. And Gregory, as the founding chairman, was the first in line, and he was on the enemies list.
Wow,
but Nixon and the Nixons greeted him very warmly. And then Nixon started to talk, and he said, my favorite film is A Friendly Persuasion. I guess I've seen it 150 times. In fact, the author of the novel is a friend of mine, and you were very good in that film. Congratulations. And Gregory Peck walked away wondering if he'd seen it 150 times had he not noticed that Gary Cooper was the star of A Friendly Persuasion. But it was a wonderfully congenial night. And Nixon not only appeared, but he gave John Ford the Medal of Freedom, America's highest honor. So it was a great occasion, the first public event with a president in Hollywood.
Yeah, and it wasn't too long until before John Ford passed away, so it really was great timing.
Right. Yes.
Yes, and another AFI Life Achievement Award that I thought was interesting, and I didn't really think about it until I read it in your book about how some people considered it odd, maybe, that Orson Welles was such an early recipient at the time. I think we think of him now as such a such a pioneer because of Citizen Kane and all of that, but it really was kind of an out of the box decision on your part.
It was. He was the third recipient: Ford, Cagney, Orson Welles, and there were a lot of great people in line. But we felt that he signified something, and it also was a signal that AFI was not, a totally establishment kind of organization, that we did recognize film as art and were leaning forward. And so he ended up being a very good choice and a marvelous recipient.
Absolutely. And also, well, and you mentioned the Cagney tribute too, and so when you watch the clips of that ceremony, you can see the love that the community had for him, and the love in that room is pretty palpable during that ceremony.
It really was. I mean, just and Cagney was, I guess, 5'6", but he walks into that room, to the music of Yankee Doodle Dandy, and you just felt, the love for him in that room, and respect and admiration.
Yes, and also, the first woman that you honored was Betty Davis, and I thought, what a great choice that was, and that's another great ceremony to watch clips from, because you can tell that she really, for a woman that we think of as so confident, you can tell she's really touched by what's being lauded toward her.
Indeed, yeah, she was lovely. I really enjoyed Betty Davis.
One person that, since you and I talked last November, who has since passed away, I know, was your friend Sidney Poitier, and yes. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about him and just get some of your memories of him and what his lasting legacy is.
Well, I had the great pleasure of being friends with Sidney, gosh, I guess for over 50 years. I had first as a young colleague of my father's, had gone to New York to propose to Sidney that he play Simon of Cyrene in The Greatest Story Ever Told. And he accepted my proposal, which made me a hero with my father. But from that time on, we were friends, and I had the honor, I would say, of directing him in Separate but Equal, the film we made about Brown versus the Board of Education, a Supreme Court case in which Thurgood Marshall is played by Sidney. And he was just almost a miracle, really, of that what he made of himself, coming from the Bahamas, hopping a freight train to New York, and getting a job as a dishwasher, and becoming this predominant figure in American culture, and certainly an icon of the international film world. Yeah, I mean, just and such a decent, such a wise, wonderful man.
He certainly stands tall in my mind. I just one of the people I truly respect. Who whenever I see a movie of his, he's mesmerizing.
Your viewers might be interested if they don't know this, because Sidney spoke of choosing his roles. He was the first actor to really have star roles, and he said he never would take a role that he thought his father wouldn't be proud of him. So Sidney was never going in the direction of playing gangsters or crooks. He felt sort of a responsibility to bring dignity to the screen, and he fulfilled it. Yeah, there was always an innate decency in his performances. Right. Yeah, and a couple of more questions for you before we get close to wrapping up here. But my favorite movie of your father's is Giant, and I know that you recently were at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival, and they debuted the brand new restored version of the movie in 4K. What was that experience like, of getting to see that movie in its new glory? Well, it was wonderful. And someone who shares your fondness for Giant is Steven Spielberg. And he called me a little over a year ago and said, Giant is a masterpiece. I think with 4K, we can restore it to its original quality. There were certain dissolves and things that weren't looking good. And so we worked on it. I, being the only living person who knows what Giant should look like, having spent time with my father in the editing room, I worked with wonderful people at Warner Brothers and Margaret Bodie at the Film Foundation on this preservation. And then Stephen and I and Margaret introduced it at Grauman's Chinese in the Turner Classic Film Festival. And it was just a great experience. First of all, the film looked so great, but to see it on a big screen, an IMAX screen, in the theater in which it was premiered 67 years before that night, and to see a new audience engage with this film for 3 hours and 21 minutes, laughter throughout, there's so much humor in Giant that people forget. There is. So it was just a wonderful thing to see this film alive in that way before an audience. I'm excited to get the new copy of the 4K when it comes out. I'm looking forward to it. And they are doing limited theatrical distribution. Oh, great! So if you can urge one of your more classic movie houses, it's opening at the Fine Arts Theater in Los Angeles on July 8th. Okay. And I know it's going to be shown at the Film Forum, and it's just wonderful to see it on the big screen. Yes. And I can't. That's one of those movies where if it's on TCM, I start it, I can't stop it. I get engrossed. It's that's what I hear from so many people. It's just you get into it, and it just carries you through. And that was so important of the structure of the screenplay, that it has that capacity that you just want to stay with it.
And somebody who you and I didn't talk about last time, but certainly is a big part of Giant, is James Dean.
Yes.
And I think that he's fantastic in the movie as Jet Ring, and really gives a wonderful performance. And those, of course, iconic images of him standing outside the house. What were your impressions of him? I know you spent some time with him very close before he tragically passed away.
Jimmy and I had lunch before the picture started in the Warner commissary. And then I would see him from time to time when I'd visit the set. I'd gone off in the Air Force during the shooting of the film. And the last time I visited the set, Jimmy had finished his work. And he had agreed not to race cars during the production on the risk that he would hurt people, would be out of work. But afterwards, he bought a new Porsche Spider, and as history has told us, he died in that car driving it to a racetrack in Salinas, California. But the week before that, I had been visiting the set, and he said, "You want to see my car?" And I went outside, and there was this silver Roadster, and he and I got in it. And we drove around the Warner lot with these big high buildings above the speed limit. But it was roaring and the sound reverberating, and we came back and parked at the Giant soundstage. And he said, "Not bad, huh?" And I said, "Not bad." And then, of course, tragically, that was the car that was going to cause his death.
It's amazing to me to think about, what he probably would have been had he been able to continue on. And he would have been, to see him, how he would have aged, and just gotten better and better as time went on. But those three movies of his that we do have are pretty special, and all three of them still hold a unique place. So he's frozen in time.
Yeah. Well, great actor.
Yeah. As we get ready to wrap up here, though, I just wanted to ask you. I know you've done a lot of these interviews here in the last month or so, and just wanted to ask: is there anything that you don't get asked that you would like to talk about or would like to say?
I'll tell you one thing I would like to say.
Yeah.
Is that, you learn things over the years, as I have been so involved working with audiences, whether it's on, the Kennedy Center Honors or the films I've made, or that I directed Peter Gunn and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, before I went to Washington. But working with my father, people ask, what's the most important thing you learned from him? And I'll tell you what it is. It's respect for the audience. There was a time in Hollywood where they said the audience has the mentality of 14-year-olds. Aim high, trust the audience. They're perceptive. Leave something for them to do. Let them figure some things out. Don't put it out there too plain for them. And so I say that to you and to your audience. They deserve respect. You deserve respect.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think that we all could use that a little bit right now, but I've got to tell you, there's so much, there's so many nuggets of gold in this book, and we just scratched the surface, but there's so much to cover. And I urge my listeners to pick it up and read it, and listen to the audiobook when it comes out, because it really is a wonderful account of this. It covers so many eras and so many presidents and eras of Hollywood. It's just a great resource. And I thanked you last time, but I will thank you again. Thank you so much for all that you have done to preserve this art form and keep it alive for future generations like me. It means so much.
Brandon, I really enjoyed talking with you twice.
Yes, yes, and yeah. So hopefully, maybe it won't be the last time. But yeah,
Let's make a point of that.
thank you so much, George.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, I just want to thank George for joining me again for this interview. Just a joy, like I said, to get to talk to somebody who has lived the life that he has led. And I can't recommend this book enough. My Place in the Sun, Life in the Golden Age of Hollywood and Washington by George Stevens Jr. This is a must-have for anybody interested in the history of film or just American history even. It covers so much ground, and we didn't even scratch the surface of what is in this book. There is no end to the jewels and the gems that you will get in this book. And just once again, an honor to speak to someone of George Stevens Jr.'s caliber, and so grateful that he shared his time with me for a second time, and hopefully someday maybe a third time. But yes, just please, please, please go out and get this book. You will not regret it. But that will do it for this episode of Front Row Classics. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming out for you this summer. Eric and I recently discussed Roman Holiday with our friend Jay Hoffman. We're going to discuss some other fun films for the summer. We're going to discuss Close Encounters of the Third Kind with Steve Sykes, What's Up Doc with Brett Rutherford, Strangers on a Train with Jeremy Geckner, and we're also going to discuss Buster Keaton and the General with Larry Smith. So a lot of great movies coming up, and then some other cool stuff for the fall, plus other interviews that we're working on. But don't want to get too much. Put the horse before the cart just yet. So we'll keep those sort of to ourselves for a little bit. But as always, you can find us on Facebook at the Front Row Classics Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at FRN Classics, Instagram FRN Classics Pod. And as always, we would love to hear your feedback. classicsfrn@gmail.com. Email us anytime and let us know what you think. Let us know if you want us to cover a certain movie. I've gotten a couple of requests through email in the last couple months, and we have put some of those suggested films on the schedule for the rest of the year. And also, this is something I don't ask very much, but I know we have a lot of you loyal listeners, and especially if you are Apple users, please leave us a review and a 5-star rating on iTunes. It would help us so much get the visibility out there, create more of a community with us, and just allow more people to join in the discussion and the love of classic films. So if you could do that, that would be great. So for Front Row Classics, I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and we will see you in the front row.